Hey, welcome everyone. In the shop today, we're working on a 2016 F150, and the complaint today is a grinding or ratcheting sound coming out of the front end. This one happens to be more prevalent when the vehicle is cold or when it's cold outside. Kind of goes away when it gets warm out. Now, this problem has plagued F150s for a lot of years. They use a vacuum actuated, locking hub design, four-wheel drive actuator deal like this right here. They call it a four-wheel drive actuator. I know it as an integrated wheel end. It goes by a lot of different names, but basically it's going to be the component that attaches the outer wheel bearing to the axle shaft, which by design is a kind of a good idea, because anytime we're not running four-wheel drive on the truck, the front CV axles are not spinning, so we have less wear on them because they've been disconnected from the outer assembly here, from the wheel itself. When we engage four-wheel drive, we stop vacuum traveling to that vacuum actuator, and the coupling comes together. When it comes together, we're now engaged our outer wheel here to our inner CV shaft, and we're now powering the wheel through the transfer case under the vehicle. So kind of a good design when they work, but they've definitely had their issues. This truck's got 60,000 miles on it, and it's getting both in the front end for an intermittent complaint. What we're going to do today is we're going to replace it on this side. It's really not that hard of a job. It requires some basic hand tools and a basic understanding of how to take the suspension apart. You have to be comfortable taking apart key suspension components and brake components when you're working on this. Torque wrench, power tools are helpful, otherwise basic sockets and that kind of thing to get into this. So really not too difficult of a job, shouldn't really take you all day. So the first step we're going to do is get the vehicle up in the air, get the wheel off of it. Now the only thing I've prepped on here so far is up at the top here, I have the ABS wheel speed sensor disconnected. That's going to be done under the hood, so you'll want to disconnect that before you get the vehicle up in the air or up on jack stands, that kind of thing. So that's disconnected, wheel is off. I'm going to go ahead and finish taking off that, the tool. So I'm going to go ahead and finish taking off that wheel speed sensor connector harness, because we have to be able to have enough flex once we get the tie rod end off and the upper control arm off. So just some plastic, like Christmas tree style pins, and we'll get our ABS harness out of the way here, held in with a little 8mm bolt there. All right, now we have full flexibility with our knuckle assembly, that we don't have to worry about that ABS harness. While we're here, we might as well quick pull apart the brake hold down, because we'll have to take that off and get that out of the way as well. So there we go. So that's out of the way. Now it's up to you if you want to take apart the caliper itself. You can pull the caliper and the pads off of the bracket itself. I just pull the caliper bracket bolts here and pull the whole caliper off and out of the way with the pads and everything still attached. It's just quicker that way. But before I do that, because I have a really low clearance here, I'm going to go ahead and pop the tie rod end off the other side first so I can move the wheel very easily. So we got a 21mm socket here on the tie rod end. All right, so that came out pretty nice. This is a nylon insert bolt or nut on here, so it's really up to you if you're replacing them, but according to the service procedure, the tie rod end nut as well as the upper ball joint nut right here need to be replaced, as well as the axle shaft nut and the brake caliper bracket bolts. They all are supposed to be replaced. All right, so that's loose and out of the way. So we'll let that hang there, and now you can see we have free play with our bracket assembly, and these are 21mm bolts on the back of here as well. Never leave this caliper hang by its hose. You can end up wrecking the hose, so you can get yourself these really cool S-clips or mechanic wire or whatever, or S-hangers, mechanics wire, whatever you want to use. Just don't leave the caliper, especially when it's the caliper, the bracket, the pads, all that weight definitely adds up. You don't ever want to leave that hanging by its hose. All right, so brackets out of the way. Now would be a good time to put brake pads and rotors in as well if you need them. So now we've got our hub exposed. We'll pull the hose off the back side of the actuator here, and actually, I'll show you guys the noise that's commonly heard. What actually happens over time is this actuator assembly right here, this is controlled by vacuum, and it ends up leaking. And when they leak, they no longer are able to hold enough vacuum to keep them fully open. So I'll go ahead and hopefully put some vacuum into here. And there we go. So this one is holding currently, but when the truck is really cold or when it's cold outside, it does not hold. But now you can see I can spin the outer hub assembly, and the axle shaft, the CV shaft, is not moving. If we go ahead and release vacuum, let all the vacuum out, now it's locked in place, and now I spin the CV shaft along with the hub assembly. What you're actually hearing when you end up with that noise is when you don't have a full supply of vacuum on it. So let's see if I can get it to... So that's a pretty extreme case, but so that's what the noise could be sounding like. That's basically partial vacuum engagement. Now, if you're dealing with this on your own vehicle and you don't have time to fix it right now, do one of two things. Either A, apply four-wheel drive with the switch or actuator or whatever you have inside the vehicle to turn four-wheel drive on. That'll go ahead and cut vacuum to this. It'll make this stay locked in all the time. Or come under the vehicle and unplug the vacuum hose right here and maybe zip tie it out of the way somewhere so it doesn't hit anything. But now, even when it's unplugged, we're locked in. So now you're not going to cause damage to the wheel bearing, because again, we have gear meshing surfaces between our locking hub and the wheel bearing hub assembly itself, and you don't want to damage that over time. So either throw it in four-wheel drive so it locks it in, or go ahead and pull the vacuum hose so it's locked in all the time. If you're going to do that, I would suggest probably disconnecting the solenoid under the hood so we don't end up applying vacuum to it and maybe causing a vacuum leak on our vehicle. All right, so that's out of the way, that's out of the way. Now we can go ahead, we can pull our, actually we'll start here. This outer cap has to come off. Now these can be tricky. I already pulled this one off so before I started filming, but what I like to do is I like to pinch it with a pliers and try to rock it back and forth. Now, if you damage it and it's not going to seal anymore, you want to go ahead and replace it, because you don't want moisture getting inside of here. You don't want it filling up with all that water and corrosion and all that stuff. So if it's damaged, replace it. And then this is a 15 millimeter nut on here. Now, take note, guys, when you're looking at this is going to be very, very critical later when we're reinstalling all this. The shaft is protruding past the nut. Okay, the depth of the shaft is at, I don't know, we're not even gonna bother measuring it. I would use the other side as comparison, or just know that when we tighten this nut down, that shaft better be protruding through that nut, otherwise we have clearance issues. All right, so that guy is loose. And actually you can see just how easy it is to press that, move that in, so that's nice and loose. All right, so now we gotta do our upper ball joint nut. Now it's stuck on the shaft right now, so instead of having this thing coming springing off of here when I hit it with a hammer, I'm going to leave the nut on just part way. 2 good smacks with the hammer, just enough to loosen it up, and I just happen to knock a brake pad out. Put that back in there. There we go. All right. So, as you can see, our axle shaft is coming out of the actuator itself, but you're not supposed to be able to take the axle shaft out with the IWE or integrated wheel end actuator still attached. You're supposed to take this off first, take the actuator off first, and then you'll be able to pull the axle shaft out. So those are just held in with 3 little 8mm bolts. And then what we'll do is we'll slide it back. Now, should be able to compress the axle shaft enough. There we go. And now it's clear of the knuckle And there's our actuator. So nothing too special to this. Bunch of grease inside of there so that we have a nice, hopefully quiet engagement on there. But what we really want to look at when we take this apart is we're looking at the teeth on, it's gonna be really hard for you guys to see, but we want to make sure we inspect the teeth that are on the hub itself back here. Make sure that it's not chewed up, that there's no metal shavings or anything inside of there. And then we want to look at the teeth on our axle shaft here itself and make sure that there's no signs of wear or anything like that. If we're seeing signs of wear on the axle shaft or the wheel bearing hub assembly itself, it'll have to get replaced. You don't want to be putting a new IWE onto there because that will only cause the new IWE to wear, which is just going to become this vicious cycle of replacing parts. So we got the old one out. Let's go ahead and grab a dirty rag here and kind of clean out some of that old grease that's in there. Because we're going to go ahead and put a bunch of new grease in there. And then we'll also clean off the axle shaft end itself. Get that all nice and clean. And then give it a good inspection again. Make sure that once it's clean now that we still don't have any signs of wear. Our new IWE does come greased, but I always like to put more grease on here. There's a special Ford, I don't know, 4-wheel drive grease or something that my friend at the Ford dealer suggested I try on here. So down below here will be the part number of what that grease is. But yeah, it wouldn't be a bad idea to throw more grease in here just to make sure that we have enough grease to make sure that our connection points when it comes time to connect are actually doing what they're supposed to. So we'll take our IWE and make sure you have it, I guess, aluminum side facing towards the axle shaft. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to install it over the shaft itself. But actually first I want to get some grease on there. So I'm just going to take, and again, this is that special, whatever, Ford Motorcraft grease, whatever it's called. I'm going to start by just doing the ring gear here, the engagement gear on the axle shaft. Just being kind of generous with the grease. And I'm also going to do where the lip here slides over the seal. Just take and kind of spread that out a little bit. Then I'm also going to put it on this inner gear as well. And we'll get that a little bit better once the IWE is kind of in place. All right, so again, now slip this guy over the axle shaft. And it has to engage. So it should kind of like mesh together. Beautiful. But now that's what it says you're supposed to do. I actually prefer to do it with attaching it to the knuckle first. So what I'm doing right now is kind of leaving the IWE loose in the center, getting our CV shaft into its home, like so. Now, I kind of like to get this guy pretty much in place where it's got to sit. About like so. And then I give it a spin to make sure that we're actually meshed together. So I'm just spinning the hub from the outside, ensuring that we're actually meshed together. And now what this does, it allows you to put more grease inside of there to hopefully help this one last a little bit longer than its previous one. And now I've never put this much grease in before, but my buddy at the Ford dealer, who I have a lot of trust in, said to really pack this thing full. So we'll see, I guess, what happens. All right, it's a good amount of grease in there. Kind of just smooth it out a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start the bolts. And I'm holding this thing nice and flat against the surface of the bearing, so that way I'm not bringing it in crooked. So you'll notice that I didn't let them really hit yet, because I want to make sure when I spin this that I'm actually connected IWE to to my bearing, and it is connected, so that is good to go. Now when we put the axle shaft through there, we need to make sure that that is also connected onto there. But first we'll get these guys snug. All right, so with the IWE now snug in place, we can go ahead and bring it together. Just be very, very careful as we start to lift this guy up. We're going to be engaging our axle shaft onto that IWE, and we need to make sure that we actually get it properly engaged before we go and potentially wreck our new IWE. So you can see here, I'm kind of taking my right hand and kind of grabbing the axle shaft and sliding it in, and right there I felt it kind of go further into place. It kind of felt like it overcame a notch. And now when you look at the outside, the shaft here is actually sticking through past this flat surface. When it wasn't engaged, when it wasn't locked in on those teeth, it was beneath the surface on here. If we were to tighten the nut down with that like that, we would end up crushing and wrecking the new IWE on here. So we would be back to doing this whole job again, which would not be fun. All right. So I got my new upper control arm bolt. We're just going to start this for the moment, just to hold everything together. And now this way, our axle shaft can't come back out. So that's started. Now we should be able to turn that, and it should turn the whole assembly. Beautiful. And if we take, and I always like to verify before I put everything back together, take our vacuum pump on here again, and where's our vacuum hose? Oh. Bracket got stuck. There we go. Brake caliper bracket got stuck. If you take this, there's two hoses on here, a bigger one and a smaller one. Take the small hose and plug the small hole in the IWE. What we're really concerned about here is the large one. That'll block off the return, basically. Go ahead and pump this up to about as close to 25 as we can get. It's holding. And I am now spinning the hub assembly. No axle shaft movement. Go ahead, let off our vacuum. We are now locked in place. Good to go. All right, now we just got to put everything back together. So starting with our upper control arm, this you might need to use a pry bar to be able to get it to basically bring it down far enough to get the nut started. A little bit of leverage downwards keeps the shaft from spinning up there in its pocket. And then the torque spec on here, I believe, was 45 foot-pounds or 46 foot-pounds, something like that. So we'll up that a little bit since we're working through a swivel and an extension. And again, this nut is supposed to be replaced. I'm going to leave our tie rod end still disconnected yet because I want to get our brake caliper bracket on first. But I think we'll do our axle shaft nut here. This was, and then again, we are thread sticking out of the end of the nut, which is good. And this is 30 foot-pounds on this one. Now, you'll see when I turn this, obviously it's going to turn the entire fixture. Just take your pry bar and counter yourself. All right. If you damaged the cap when removing it, make sure you replace it. Again, you don't want moisture getting in there. Nice and snug, doesn't come back out, we're good to go. All right, now we can go ahead and throw the brake rotor back on. If you have rust built up between the surface, you should clean that off. This is nice and clean still because it was not done too long ago on the brakes on here. put our brake pad that fell out back in the bracket. Actually, before I grab that off of there, again, these are supposed to be replaced as well, per the service procedure. It's up to you on what you do with your own vehicle. This does happen to be my own vehicle, so I have chose to reuse the bolts and put red Loctite on there. But again, it's your choice on what you decide to do, whether it's at your shop, your vehicle, and whether you replace the bolts or not. The bolts came with Loctite on them. I know we talked about this during an ABS video that I had done a while ago about torque to yield bolts on newer GM and Buick vehicles for brake caliper brackets. You'll find with torque to yield bolts, they don't have Loctite on them, where these did have Loctite on them from the factory. So I'm not concerned about them being torque to yield. Plus, they are 186 foot-pounds, and then there's no additional 90 degrees or anything, 60 degrees, anything like that. All right, that is in place. I think I'll go ahead and anchor down that caliper bracket right away. And also the hold down for the ABS harness. Oh, make sure we're on the right side of the bracket here. The ABS harness ended up in the wrong place. There we go. And then again, we'll finish the connection point here under the hood on here. Much easier than trying to do it from underneath. And then last but not least, we got our tie rod end to install. So you can see it kind of spinning right now. We got to go ahead and get some leverage on there. And then our tie rod end comes in at 85 foot-pounds on there. All right, so tie rod end is tight. The upper ball joint is tight and torqued. Our brake caliper bracket is tight. Our IWE is tight. Everybody is back where they belong. We just got to go ahead and hook up the ABS harness yet and put the wheel back on, but that's really it, guys. That is job complete. We should have engagement with our CV shaft when we're sitting here, engine off. If we go ahead and fire this truck up right now in two-wheel drive, we should see a free spinning hub, our CV shaft not spinning with it. All right, so that's about it for this job. Start to finish, including torque specs. I hope you guys appreciated that. Hope you found this video useful. If you did, of course, please give us that thumbs up, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click on that little subscribe button. Click on the bell next to it. That way you get a notification when we go ahead and release our next video. Again, I really appreciate you guys watching. Thank you for being here. And as always, everyone, happy wrenching. Thank you.